The water is on fire, and the destroyer is dying, but it will not sink. 73 men are trapped on a ship with no power, no guns, no way to scream for help, and the ocean just keeps them there, floating in their own tomb. They should be dead. Already, the ship should have gone down in the first 20 minutes. That's what happens when a destroyer takes a hit like this. Quick and clean, over before the fear sets in. But this one just drifts, broken and bleeding oil, refusing to die. The crew waits hour after hour, day after day, and no one comes because no one knows where they are, and maybe no one is looking. The Navy told them these ships could take damage, that rescue was always close, that the Pacific was covered, every grid, every zone, every square mile accounted for, but that was a lie. And somewhere in a locked office 6,000 miles away, someone already knew it. 3 days these men float, watching the horizon for smoke or wings or anything. And the only question that matters is this. If the Navy knew destroyers could end up like this, invisible and unreachable, why did they let it happen? And how many other ships are still out there, still waiting, still drifting in the dark? April 16, 1945, and the USS Laffey is operating radar picket duty 50 miles north of Okinawa, positioned exactly where the Navy wanted her, alone and exposed, a early warning tripwire for the invasion fleet, sitting fat and safe over the horizon. The morning comes in quiet, too quiet, and then the sky fills with them. 22 Japanese aircraft, kamikaze pilots who have already decided to die, and they choose the Laffey because she is alone and small, and they can see her from miles away. The first plane comes in low, so low the gunners can see the pilot's face, and it slams into the aft deck. The explosion tears through berthing compartments, and the ship lurches hard to starboard. Flames pour out of the holes, and the crew is already moving, damage control teams rushing below into smoke and heat, and the smell of burning metal and flesh. Then the second plane hits, then a third. Then bombs start falling because some of the kamikazes are carrying ordnance, and they drop it before they crash. And the Laffey is being torn apart piece by piece. 4 hits, 5, 6. The gun mounts are shredded. The superstructure is collapsing. Men are thrown overboard or pinned under twisted steel, and the engine room takes a direct hit that kills the power and leaves the ship dead in the water. By the time the attack ends 80 minutes later, the Laffey has been struck by 6 kamikazes and 4 bombs. Fires rage from bow to stern. The steering is gone, the guns are gone, the radio is gone, and 32 men are dead, with over 70 wounded, some so badly burned their skin comes off when you touch them. The ship lists 15 degrees to port. Water pours into the hull through ruptures the size. The Fletcher-class destroyer was built to be expendable, but not fragile. A ship designed to take punishment and either survive it or go down fast enough that rescue could focus elsewhere. The Navy wanted speed and firepower packed into a hull that could operate alone, far from the battle line, screening carriers or hunting submarines or standing picket duty in waters where Japanese planes came in waves. The expectation was simple, and it was repeated in every training manual and every briefing before a ship deployed. If you take catastrophic damage, if the hull is compromised and the systems are gone, the ship will either stay afloat long enough for help to arrive or it will sink quickly and the crew will abandon in good order. There was no in-between, no scenario where a destroyer hung in the water for days, crippled and invisible, because the design did not allow for it and the doctrine did not plan for it. Damage control procedures assumed that watertight integrity could be maintained, that even with flooding, the compartmentalization would keep the ship stable, that pumps and shore parties and neighboring vessels would respond within hours, not days. The South Pacific was supposed to be covered. Every task force had screening units, every picket station had fallback support, every grid square on the operations map was assigned to someone, and the communications web was supposed to be tight. Enough that a ship going silent would trigger immediate search and rescue. Destroyers were not built to survive alone. They were built to be part of a system, a network of ships and planes and radio channels that kept track of every unit, every position, every change in status, and if a ship went down, the system would know, and if a ship was damaged, the system would respond. That was the promise, the assumption, baked into every deployment order and every tactical plan. And it was a promise the crews believed because they had no choice, because operating radar picket 50 miles from the fleet meant trusting that someone was watching, that someone would come. The Laffey's crew had been told this, had been briefed on survivability and rescue protocols, had been assured that even in the worst-case scenario, they would not be left drifting, and they believed it because the alternative was unthinkable. But now the Laffey sits dead in the water, no engine, no radio, no way to signal, and the hours stretch into a full day and then into a second day, and the help does not come, and the crew begins to understand that the system has failed, that the network has a hole in it, and they are in that hole. The contrast is brutal, and it is obvious. The ship should have sunk or been found. Those were the only two outcomes the Navy planned for. But the Laffey is doing neither. She is floating in a state the doctrine does not account for, and the men aboard her are paying the price for assumptions that turned out to be wrong. The Laffey is not the first, and she will not be the last, because all through 1944 and into 1945, destroyers keep ending up in the same nightmare, crippled but afloat, drifting in empty ocean while the Navy struggles to find them or does not find them at all. The USS Johnston takes devastating fire at Leyte Gulf in October 1944, her engine room flooded, her bridge destroyed, power gone, and she floats for hours after the battle ends, listing heavily, men clinging to wreckage, waiting for rescue that comes too late for most of them because the task force has moved on and no one is sure exactly where Johnston went down. The USS Callahan is hit by two kamikazes off Okinawa just weeks before the Laffey. The strikes tear open her hull and knock out all propulsion. Fires consume the superstructure, and she drifts for 6 hours before anyone realizes she is still afloat, still trying to fight the flooding, and by the time help arrives, 47 men are dead, and the ship is so low in the water she sinks while being towed. The pattern is the same every time: catastrophic damage, systems failure, communication lost, and then the long, terrible drift while the crew waits and wonders if anyone is coming, if anyone even knows they are still alive. These ships do not sink clean. They hang in the water like wounded animals, buoyant enough to stay on the surface, but too damaged to move or call for help. And the Navy's search and rescue doctrine is not built for this. It is built for ships that either survive with power intact or go down fast with clear last known positions. The Fletcher-class hull design is part of the problem. The compartmentalization is good enough to prevent immediate sinking, but not good enough to maintain stability under severe flooding. So the ships list and wallow and drift with the current, miles from where they were hit, and the search grids are based on pre-attack positions that are no longer accurate. Radar picket duty makes it worse because these destroyers operate alone, far from mutual support, and when they go silent, the fleet assumes they have been sunk outright, assumes the crew is gone, and the search effort is delayed or scaled back, or never launched at all because no one thinks there is anyone left to save. The USS Hull, the USS Gambier Bay, the USS Samuel B. Roberts, all of them fought alone. All of them took damage that should have sent them down immediately, and all of them floated long enough that men died waiting, died from wounds that could have been treated, died from exposure because the rescue came hours or days too late. The Navy knows this is happening. Fleet commanders are filing reports, survivor accounts are documenting the delays, and the pattern is undeniable. But the doctrine does not change. The search procedures do not improve, and ships keep drifting, keep waiting, keep dying slowly in the water while the system that promised to save them fails over and over again. Part 5. They knew, warnings ignored. The warnings were there long before the first kamikaze ever dove, buried in test reports and design reviews, and quiet conversations between naval architects who understood exactly what would happen if a Fletcher-class destroyer took the kind of damage the Pacific War was already delivering. In 1942, before most of these ships ever saw combat, Engineers at the Bureau of Ships raised concerns about the compartmentalization scheme, noting that while the watertight subdivision was adequate for peacetime collisions, it had not been stress-tested for the kind of cascading failures that occurred when multiple compartments flooded simultaneously or when fire suppression systems were knocked offline. The report suggested that destroyers suffering severe topside damage combined with hull breaches could enter a prolonged state of marginal buoyancy, floating but uncontrollable, and that existing search and rescue protocols assumed either functional propulsion or rapid sinking, not the extended drift scenario that the design might actually produce. Those reports were filed, reviewed, and set aside, not because they were wrong, but because changing the design meant delaying production, and the Navy needed destroyers in the water more than it needed perfect destroyers. By 1944, the evidence was piling up in after-action reports and survivor debriefs, sailors describing ships that refused to sink, that wallowed for hours or days, that drifted out of search zones while rescue forces looked in the wrong places or did not look at all. Fleet commanders sent recommendations up the chain, suggesting dedicated search and rescue destroyers, suggesting extended search patterns for picket ships that went silent, suggesting better coordination between air patrols and surface units, so that crippled ships would not be mistaken for total losses. Some of those recommendations were acknowledged, some were partially implemented in specific task forces, but none of them became standard doctrine. None of them were pushed fleet-wide, and the gaps remained. There were internal memos, quiet admissions in planning meetings, acknowledgments that the current system had failure points, that destroyers on radar picket were operating in a gray zone where if things went wrong, the response might not be fast enough, but the operational tempo did not allow for the kind of overhaul that would fix it. And the assumption was that the losses, while regrettable, were acceptable given the strategic objectives. No one wanted to say it out loud. No one wanted to put it in writing in a way that could be traced later. But the decision had been made. The ships would keep going out. The picket stations would keep being manned. And if some of them ended up drifting and unreachable, that was the cost, and the cost was acceptable because Okinawa had to be taken and the kamikazes had to be stopped before they reached the carriers. The crews were not told, the captains were not briefed on the risk, and the families back home certainly did not know that the Navy had already run the numbers and decided that some men would be left waiting in the water, that some ships would float just long enough to make the dying slow. The first day on the Laffey is chaos and adrenaline, men fighting fires and pulling bodies from wreckage and trying to stop the flooding with whatever they can find. But by the second day, the chaos fades, and what is left is just heat and thirst, and the slow realization that no one is coming. The wounded are laid out on the deck because the berthing compartments are flooded or burned, and there is no morphine left and no way to treat the burns that cover entire bodies, skin blackened and peeling, men crying for water that the crew cannot give them because the freshwater tanks are contaminated with seawater and oil. Ensign Robert Thomason moves through the wreckage with a piece of canvas, covering the faces of the dead because there is no time to move them and no place to put them. And he counts 32 bodies, but he knows there are more below, trapped, in compartments that are flooded or sealed off by fire, and he does not know if he should keep counting or just stop. The sun beats down without mercy. The deck is too hot to touch, and the men who are not wounded are exhausted from 72 hours of fighting a ship that will not die and will not be saved. Their hands are burned from hauling hot metal. Their throats are raw from smoke, and they sit in whatever shade they can find and watch the horizon for something that never comes. Gunner's mate Fred Gemmell sits by the wrecked aft gun mount, where he watched 3 of his crew get killed in the first 30 seconds of the attack, and he has not slept since, because every time he closes his eyes, he sees the kamikaze coming. In low, sees the explosion, sees the bodies thrown into the air, and he does not know if he is supposed to feel lucky that he survived or guilty that they did not. The fear shifts as the hours pass, from the immediate terror of fire and sinking to the slower, deeper fear that they have been forgotten, that the fleet has written them off as lost, that the search planes are looking somewhere else or not looking at all. Some of the men talk about swimming for it, about trying to make it to Okinawa or to one of the smaller islands, but the officers shut that down because the currents are too strong and the sharks are real, and anyone who goes in the water alone is not coming back. By the third day, the wounded are delirious, calling for mothers and wives and medics who are not there, and the able-bodied crew can do nothing but sit with them and lie and say, help is coming soon, say the destroyers are on the way, say everything is going to be fine, and they do not believe it themselves, but they say it anyway, because what else is there to say? The Laffey drifts 17 miles from where she was hit, carried by wind and current into a part of the ocean that is not on anyone's search grid, and the men aboard her begin to understand that survival is not a guarantee, that the Navy's promises about rescue and coverage and no man left behind are just words, just things you tell sailors so they will go out and stand picket and take the hits that are meant for someone else. When the fleet finally finds them on the fourth day, it is not because of a coordinated search, it is because a patrol plane happens to fly over and spots the wreckage and radios it in, and by then 3 more men have died from wounds that could have been treated if help had come sooner, if the system had worked the way it was supposed to, if someone had cared enough to keep looking. The Laffey is towed back to port, and the crew is transferred, and the Navy calls it a victory, calls it a testament to American shipbuilding and the courage of destroyer men, and the headlines say, the ship that would not die, say miracle on the picket line, say 73 men saved. But no one asks why it took 4 days. No one asks why the search grid missed them. No one asks how many other ships drifted just like this and were never found at all. The after-action reports are filed, and the recommendations are written, and some of them even get read. But the doctrine does not change, the search and rescue procedures are not overhauled, and destroyers keep going out on picket duty, keep operating. Alone in waters where if something goes wrong, the response time is measured in days, not hours, and the crews are still not told. The families of the men who died waiting are given folded flags and letters that say their sons and husbands served with honor, gave their lives in defense of freedom, but the letters do not say that those men floated for 72 hours with treatable wounds, do not say that the Navy knew ships could end up like this, do not say that the decision to send destroyers out alone without adequate search coverage was a choice someone made and kept making even after the evidence came in. The Laffey survives, but she is one ship, one crew, one story that happened to end with rescue, and the math is simple and brutal. If this ship drifted for 4 days before being found, how many others drifted for 5 or 6 or 7? How many sank just hours before the search planes arrived? How many crews are still out there in the archives, listed as lost with all hands, when the truth is they floated and waited and died slowly while the system failed them? The war ends and the records are sealed, and the men who made the decisions about acceptable losses and operational tempo move on to other commands, other wars, and no one is ever held accountable, because accountability would require admitting that some American sailors were left to drift, were left to die, not because of enemy action, but because the Navy's own procedures had gaps, and the gaps were known, and nothing was done. The question stays unanswered, stays buried in the files, and the survivor accounts that no one reads. If the system could lose a destroyer for 4 days just 50 miles from the fleet, if the search could fail that badly for a ship that was exactly where it was supposed to be, then how many others were lost, not to the enemy, but to negligence, to bureaucracy, to the cold calculus that said some crews were worth saving and some were not, and who decided which was which?